I just found my wife outside. I'm sitting here freaking out. It's 3:17 a.m. and I just found my wife outside. This is going to be a mess. As I'm still shaking, but let me explain it as best I can. So a bunch of years ago, we lived in another house. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard noises coming from the other half of the house. I quietly opened the bedroom door and immediately saw a light on in my wife's study, which was situated next to the kitchen. The house we lived in was a few blocks away from the bad neighborhood, so my immediate thought was that someone had broken in and was going through the stuff in my wife's room. As my wife had come to bed with me several hours prior, and as far as I knew, she was still in bed. I crept through the house and was ready to confront the person in the room when I realized that it was my wife. In my still half-asleep state, I just assumed she was still in bed. Turns out she had woken up, couldn't get back to sleep, and so went to her room to browse Facebook or whatever for a while. I had almost confronted my own wife, thinking she was a burglar. Now, in our current house, we have a screen door and a wooden door. The wooden door has a deadbolt on it, and you have to make sure that you take the house keys with you because if you close the wooden door, you're not getting back in unless you grab the hidden spare key or knock on the door window to be let back in. So it's about an hour ago, I'm woken up by the front door rattling. I immediately grab my phone and pull up the security camera located right by the front door. To my surprise, I see my wife standing there, kind of shivering. It's definitely her, because we've been married for over a decade, and I know what my own wife looks like. She's dressed in the same clothing she wore today, a red top and black pants. 100% her. I don't know what she's doing outside, but she is. Confused, I roll over, and there's my wife fast asleep. Remembering the incident in our last place, I use my phone screen to shine a light on her and confirm that it's definitely her, and she's definitely in the bed. At this point, I'm really confused. I get up and make my way through the house to the front door. As I walk into the lounge room, our cat looks up at me, half asleep. Normally, she's super curious about stuff going on outside, and I would have thought that hearing the screen door rattling would have caused her to be at the door trying to see what's going on. But it's as if she hasn't heard a thing. I stand by the door and call out, "Who is it?" "It's me. Hurry up and let me back in. I'm freezing." I went outside because I heard something, but forgot to take the keys in my bag with me. That absolutely sounds like my wife. Accent, intonation, knowledge about where her set of keys is, everything. But I'm not convinced, because I've just seen her sleeping in the bed with my own eyes. "Hold on a second," I tell her. Now I'm heading back through the house and into the bedroom. I wake up my wife and say, "This is really fucking weird. You have to see this." I open the camera app and show her the front door. She's still at the door, looking around, wondering what I'm doing because all I need to do to let her back in is turn the handle on the deadbolt and open the door. My wife says, "What the fuck? When was that recorded?" I tell her, "It's not. This is live. You're standing outside by the front door. I just went down there and asked who it was, and your voice told me it was you, and that I should let you back in because you're freezing and you left your keys in your bag." My wife gets up and peers through the bedroom window, as you can just see the front door alcove from there. She gasps and pulls the curtains shut. She turns around, and I'll never forget the look on her face as long as I live. She's terrified. "That's me," she says. At this point, I'm freaked the fuck out. I'm wide awake. I'm speaking to my wife, and I'm physically touching her while trying to peer out the window with her. But there she is, standing outside in the very outfit she wore today. Same hair, same glasses, same everything. We walk into the lounge room, and I grab the big torch I have. It's a big, sturdy, metal, super bright light. Great for blinding people and hitting them if they get too close. We stand by the door again. "What's your name?" I ask. She tells me her full name, including her middle name. It's correct. "What's your birth date?" She tells me. It's also correct. "What did we have for dinner tonight?" She tells me this too, and tells me that I cooked it. This is right too. I can hear my real wife standing next to me, trying to control her breathing, as she's scared out of her wits. I nudge her and whisper, "Ask her something only you would know." After a moment to steady herself and think of something, she speaks. "When we last stayed with my parents, what change had Dad made to my old room?" There was a pause. "Who is that?" the person outside said. "Why aren't you letting me in? You know it's me. You're starting to freak me out here. Who is that inside with you? Is that a recording of me? What's going on here?" I said, "Answer the question. What change had been made to your room when we last visited?" Another pause. Then finally, there was a second bed added as Max and Damien, my brother-in-law's two kids, sleep in there while visiting mom and dad. There's an audible gasp from my wife next to me. Now we're both freaked out. I grab her hand and lead her back into the bedroom and turn the lights on. We're still awake, watching the cameras. The other person walked towards the backyard, presumably to grab the spare key, but that was about 40 minutes ago and I haven't seen them since. I'm too shit scared to go to bed because I'm scared that this person, who knew everything about my wife, will find the spare key and enter. I don't know who the fuck they really are or what they want, but I'm not sleeping. Husband wanted. I'm aware that this is unconventional. Believe me, I've tried conventional. It didn't end well for anyone. I require a certain open-mindedness that I hope to find here. But more importantly, I need my future husband to know the rules. Meet cutes are well and good on the screen, but they don't guarantee a partner's ability to follow basic instructions. That was my mistake the first time. So, begging your pardon for my bluntness, I'm going to be clear about my requirements. Please read carefully. If you can't meet them, there's no point in going any further. Must want children. At least one child anyway. I'm open to the idea of more, but one is an absolute must. Must be in it for the long haul. Until our child turns 18, to be precise. I understand that level of commitment is a daunting prospect, particularly when we have not yet met. After our child is born, you are welcome to ignore me, if you please, or take your pleasure elsewhere, though I will warn you that it might be difficult to come by. But you will live under my roof until our child is an adult, homebody preferred. It will make the next 2 decades easier on you. Must have impeccable manners. I will provide a manual outlining the required etiquette, but you must at least have a grasp of basic courtesy to begin with. If you let your tongue run away with you, or don't bother to wish your neighbors a good morning when you pass them in the street, stop reading. This is not the opportunity for you. Seriously. This is the part where I should talk about myself, but let's face it, this is hardly a romantic proposal. I require commitment up front, and there's no guarantee that once we do meet, we'll really even like each other. If we do, fantastic. It'll help the years fly by. If we don't, you'll still have the main prize. Years of rent-free, expenses-free living at the Old Oak Hotel. A sanctuary has stood in this spot in one form or another since before the ley lines. During its tenure, it has been flooded, set to the flame, and pounded into dust. Time and again, it has been reimagined and rebuilt. Most of the current building dates back to Victoria's reign, though the oldest parts were constructed in the 13th century. At the very bottom of the garden, cut into the surrounding hills, there is a cave bearing handprints of red ochre. There has always been an Edwards at the hotel, though. Of course, we haven't always gone by that name. You would think a family so tied to one place would do a better job of keeping records, but no one is certain of our origins. Perhaps it was a cosmic bargain, or perhaps mere luck. Whether good or bad, I have never been able to decide. Either way, our presence is required. Throughout our spotty past, there's a story here and there of an Edwards deserting their post, and it always coincides with a particularly brutal period of history. I inherited the position 5 years ago. At midnight on my 18th birthday, my parents took their already packed suitcases and left. I don't blame them for their abandonment. I intend to one day do the same thing to my, or hopefully, our child. They send me postcards and photos from time to time, always smiling on sunny beaches. Money isn't a concern for them. That's part of whatever mysterious deal our ancestors made. When a caretaker leaves in good standing, they will never want for anything again. They could travel the world for the rest of their lives, always sleeping in the softest sheets and dining in the finest restaurants, and never find their pockets empty. Keep this point in mind, for if you can meet my requirements, you will share my good fortune. And what must we do in return? I can all but hear you scream the question. Why? Very little. The presence of an Edwards ensures that the guests can't stray from the hotel grounds. Most of our guests are live-in residents, though we do get the occasional walk-in. Where they come from, I don't know, for we are not visible to most people who stumble upon our lonely corner of the world. I've come to believe the hotel chooses to reveal itself when it's lacking entertainment, or to fill a need. Jimmy, my first husband, was one such guest. For the most part, the guests are harmless. They'll give you a little fright from time to time, popping out from a wall or turning your bathwater into blood. But I find it hard to hold it against them. I found 23 years here dreary. I can't imagine how bored I would be after 500. There are a few exceptions you should be aware of. Eric, our resident serial murderer. He claims to have been Jack the Ripper while he still drew breath, but I think he's just a blowhard. He knows better than to harm an Edwards, but I'm afraid spouses are fair game. Years ago, my grandmother managed to confine him to the 4th floor, so you will be perfectly safe from him as long as you never set foot there. Occasionally, the lift will stop on that floor even though you haven't pressed the button for it. Do not get out. Even if the lift appears to be on fire or starts filling with murky water, wait for the doors to close again, then go to another floor. It should only take a few hours. The thing in the cellar. I don't know what it is. No one ever has. We only know it eats rats and must be fed once a day. If I'm ever ill or incapacitated, this task will fall to you. Harvest the rats from the traps in the garden, then stand at the cellar door and throw them down the stairs. Do not walk down the stairs and do not forget to feed it. You don't want to be the first person to see its face. Mrs. Jones, old-fashioned and a stickler for manners, she's the reason I'm advertising for a husband rather than a boyfriend. She won't abide a couple living in sin under the same roof as her. Really though, she's a sweet old thing, full of stories about the war and always ready to help if I get stuck on a recipe. I don't blame her for what happened with Jimmy at all. I'd warned him enough times. Guests aside, there are other rules you will need to follow to ensure a safe, satisfactory stay at the Old Oak Hotel. They are listed in a book that has been repenned many times over the centuries. If you choose to accept this opportunity, I will insist that you read it until you can recite the pages word for word. However, there are some rules so critical for your survival that I feel compelled to list them here. Except for the 4th floor, you are welcome to roam the hotel and its grounds as you please. But you must never set foot outside of our land, not until our child is old enough to fulfill their duties. If I were to do so, it would unleash pandemonium, plague, peril, perhaps another world war. I'm afraid you would be less crucial to the fate of the world, but it would certainly be a personal disaster. Never look in the mirrors in room 33. I've touched this point already, but it bears repeating. Never be rude to Mrs. Jones. Failure to observe that last rule is what got Jimmy. She doted on him. I think he reminded her of her long-dead son, for she pampered him as if he were one of her own. Each morning, she had breakfast ready for him before I had so much as opened my eyes, and she developed a habit of trailing along after him, complimenting his skill as he oiled rusted hinges or set a crooked picture straight. At first, Jimmy basked in the attention. But by the end of his 2nd month, he was growing bored with Mrs. Jones, me, and the hotel itself. We pride ourselves on our facilities. If you need more activity than a turn around the garden, we have a lovely indoor pool. It freezes over now and then, but most of the time it's perfectly usable. Our library is unmatched. Although the room is cramped, it has every book imaginable. You only need to think of a particular title, and it will appear on one of the shelves. And now that I've dragged us kicking and screaming into the 21st century, we have a wide array of streaming services. It wasn't enough for Jimmy. He wanted to go out, eat in a restaurant, watch a film in the cinema, and see faces other than the ones he was surrounded by every day. He began having a drink each evening. One drink turned into several, and after a few weeks, the bar became his permanent residence. Between dusk and midnight, he wasn't the only one getting bored. I'd been thrilled when he first arrived, ecstatic when he agreed to stay. How marvelous to feel real flesh beneath my fingers after 5 years of only the dead for company. What a relief to have some assistance in the many tasks required to keep the hotel running as it should. The more he drank, the less inclined he was to help, or even spend time in my company. He no longer visited my bed, choosing a room for himself on the opposite end of the floor. When our paths did cross, at best, he would ignore me. At worst, he would nitpick or outright rail against me, blaming me for his captivity. Still, I made an effort to be present whenever he frequented the bar. As lovely as Mrs. Jones can be, she does tend to nag. Before and after her death, she was close to teetotal, only consenting to take a single sherry at Christmas, and drinking outside of special occasions is something of a bugbear of hers. "Think of your health, dear," she would tell Jimmy brusquely. "You'll miss it when it's gone." Or, "How about we switch to a nice apple juice now? You've had quite enough to drink for one night." Most of the time, Jimmy managed to pull himself together enough to flash a charming smile and distract her with a compliment about her latest meal. But after one drink too many, I'd noticed him gritting his teeth and just barely managing to hold his tongue. It would have been better if I were present. Playing the doting wife, I insisted on pouring his drinks, watering them down out of his sight. When Mrs. Jones's nagging bordered on relentless, I could always distract her with a game of gin rummy. On his final day, I was running behind. The ghoul on the second floor, usually the least demanding of our guests, had come down with some dreadful illness, or else decided he wanted to inconvenience me. Either way, I had woken that morning to the foulest stench I had ever experienced. I followed it to his room and found every surface covered in putrid green blank gunge, its consistency somewhere between mucus and vomit. All day I scrubbed, taking only brief breaks to step outside before I fainted. By the time the room was restored to a passable state and I had filled several bin bags to bursting with filthy rags, it was already deep into the night. Mindful of the time, I paused only long enough to wash the streaks of muck from my arms and face before racing to the bar. I arrived just in time to hear Jimmy's last words. After he spat them at Mrs. Jones, she only stared for a small eternity, her mouth frozen in the motherly smile she wore whenever she scolded him. Then, like melted wax, her face began to shift. I shouted at Jimmy to run, but he didn't need to be told. Before the words left my mouth, he leapt from his bar stool and streaked through the door. Mrs. Jones followed him seconds later. Her lips were already peeling back to reveal rows upon rows of long, wickedly sharp fangs, while claws sprouted from beneath her lace-edged cuffs. I sprinted after them, but Jimmy was fueled by fear, and Mrs. Jones, by whatever force, propels the Mrs. Joneses of the world. I followed the screeching to the lobby. Breathless, I arrived to see he had arrived within mere feet of the entrance before Mrs. Jones grabbed him. Claws wrapped around his throat, she lifted him into the air. As I watched, her jaw unhinged, the lower part dropping so that it was nearly level with her chest. That sight drove all the sense out of my head. Forgetting every rule my parents had ever drilled into me, I lunged at her. She batted me away, as though I weighed no more than a fly. I crashed into the reception desk, the breath bursting from my lungs in a great whoosh. I was certain that I would die, for no amount of effort seemed to force air back into my aching chest. At last, as my vision began to dim, I managed to take a small gulp, then another, and another, until I was able to draw myself together enough to regain my feet. By that time, Mrs. Jones had nearly finished her dinner. Jimmy's chest was splayed open, muscle and shattered ribs protruding every which way from his flesh, and she was devouring the last few bites of his heart. His head was angled towards me. The light had winked out from his eyes, but they still held his final terror, and an accusation which, I was quite certain, was directed at me. I would like to say I felt only horror, but I couldn't help my sudden jolt of irritation. How many times had I told him to mind his manners? Mrs. Jones gulped, the sound thick and wet in her gullet, and dropped what remained of Jimmy to the floor. Then she turned to me. Here's another rule for you, one which I hope you never have cause to use. Never interfere with a kill. The Mrs. Jones who used to kiss my grazed knees, who argued with my mother for the right to read me bedtime stories, was no longer at the wheel. No amount of pleading or reasoning would move her. I could only run. Spinning around, I vaulted over the reception desk and raced for the office behind it. If Jimmy had not been out of his mind with fear and booze, he might have remembered the rules and survived. It was one of several staff-only rooms throughout the hotel, warded to keep out unwanted guests. Just 10 steps from desk to door, yet it was the longest journey of my life. My hard-won breath burned my throat. My heart pounded in my ears, deafening me to all other sounds than Mrs. Jones's heavy, pounding footsteps. Grasping the handle, her hot, copper-tanged breath was on my neck. Fire exploded in my flesh as she raked her claws down my back. A step further away, and I wouldn't have made it. The pain would have been too great. But I managed to throw myself into the office and slam the door before crumpling to the ground. Before I passed out, I heard her grunting and shrieking outside, furious that she couldn't get in. 3 days I spent in the office, emerging only to feed the thing in the cellar before scurrying back to my hiding place. Whenever I left, I tried not to look at the mangled heap that used to be Jimmy. There was no avoiding the smell though. With no small difficulty and the help of a first aid kit, I managed to treat and bandage the wounds on my back. They bled sluggishly all throughout the first day, but thankfully didn't fester. On the morning of the 4th day, there was a tentative knock on the door followed by the sound of rapidly retreating footsteps. I waited until they had disappeared down the corridor before cracking the door open. On the floor was a freshly baked Victoria sponge and a beautifully written note of apology. It took every ounce of courage I possessed, but that evening I forced myself to go to the dining room. Mrs. Jones was waiting for me, her eyes red-rimmed, a steaming cottage pie on the table. I tried not to flinch as she took my hand, reiterating the apology she had already delivered in writing. The next morning, she helped me clean Jimmy up. We treated each other cautiously for a while, but eventually we got back to playing gin rummy again. When the scars on my back twinge, as they sometimes do, she helps me rub a soothing ointment into them. Even though I've told her it's not necessary, she apologizes every time. So you've heard my story, and you have my proposal. If you think you could be the man for me, I invite you to visit. You will need to drink a cup of ram's blood. A pinch of nutmeg makes it a little more tolerable. And light a black candle before bedtime. When you next wake, you will find yourself at our gates. As travel arrangements go, it's hardly the Orient Express, but it beats the airfare. If you have read this without flinching. If you can stomach the journey to get here. If you walk up to our door and find the nerve to open it, I have one more instruction for you. Just as you enter, look to your right. You will see a deep brown stain on the lobby carpet. I've scrubbed and scrubbed, but it just won't come out. Perhaps that's for the best. It's a good reminder of what will happen to you should you call Mrs. Jones a nosy old bat. And when you run into Jimmy, as you will, for he still likes hanging around the bar in the evening, his silvery wounds glistening as though they had just been inflicted. Don't let him convince you he was some sort of victim. He knew the rules. If you're enjoying this so far, a like and subscribe would mean the world and help this channel grow. Let me know in the comments which story stayed with you the most. Now let's continue. My dad is a chair. The title doesn't lie. My dad is a chair. To be specific, he's a fully upholstered, bright orange, angel accent, living room chair. The kind with wooden legs you'd find in any three-piece suit from the 70s. He's pretty comfortable, truth be told. A little lumpy in places, but his padding is soft. Warm too. He's always warm. There's also the telltale ba-thump, ba-thump, ba-thump coming from his back cushion. A steady rhythm at my lumbar to remind me I'm sitting in no ordinary chair. He wasn't always a chair. Until last year, he was Kevin the accountant. He was 51, slightly overweight, and generally seemed to enjoy life as a human. He was married to Mom. He still is, but, well, as you can imagine, it's a little complicated now. It was funny at first. He came home from work one day and just sat in a corner of the living room. When we'd ask him why he was sitting on the floor and not the $4,000 cream leather couch, he'd just smile and say, "It feels right here." It stopped being funny the morning he didn't go to work. Turns out he hadn't slept the night before. He'd been watching a movie with Mom, but hadn't gone with her to bed. She left him sitting in his spot, unsuspicious of the "I'm not tired, I'll be up a little later" lie. She and I both begged him to get up, but he refused to move. Phoned in sick at work, the whole deal. Just spent the day sitting on the floor in his corner. We kept asking him what was wrong, why he wouldn't get up except to use the bathroom. And he just kept saying, no, this feels right. Mom phoned the doctor around the third day of this. He'd stopped eating or drinking, you see. Stopped getting up to use the bathroom too. Surprisingly though, there weren't as many, accidents as you'd think. Once he'd allowed the last of the food and drink to leave him, it seemed to stop coming. We also didn't hear his belly growl despite going a day and a half without food. The doctor couldn't make sense of it. Their first guess was that it was psychosomatic, but that wouldn't explain the absence of digestive activity exposed by the stethoscope. They said they'd be back to take some blood samples in a few days after they liaised with some colleagues. Unfortunately, as I said, this was last year, 2020. We never heard back from the doctor, thanks to the virus that shall not be named. I guess guy with gut troubles who refuses to move is low on the priorities list during a global pandemic. Somehow, Mom managed to wrangle long-term sick leave with Dad's company. Decades of loyal employeeism combined with Mom's attendance of every company BBQ and softball game helped Mr. Banafrag by the unexplained stomach concern requiring hospitalization excuse. I'll never forget that phone call. At the time, Dad losing his job was the worst case scenario for both of us. He'd always been the breadwinner. Neither of us could support ourselves without him. We'd lose the house in under a year. Dad didn't seem too perturbed by Mom's frantic pacing or the lies she wormed through the phone to Mr. Banafrag. He just stared at the wall serenely, hovering his butt half a foot from the carpet, balancing with his legs bent and his hands flat on the ground behind him. That night, I fell asleep listening to Mom yelling at Dad. He never yelled back. We started noticing the physical changes a few days later. That's when we realized this wasn't psychosomatic. Unfortunately, our shitty best insurance deal on the market doctor wasn't picking up the phone. We'd get passive-aggressive emails informing us they were waiting to hear back from colleagues. But that was it. This was not good, especially not when the joints in Dad's arms and legs had fused. The not goodness of Doctor's silence increased 1,000-fold when we sent photos of Dad's hands and feet flaking off like discarded spider husks the following week. Did the response change? No. We got a very snippy email about shortages on ICU wards and the critical international situation. Mom's shouting match with the chief of medicine, the one she demanded her way up the phone chain to speak to, didn't change things. We were on our own. Mom spent all her time in the living room with Dad. I'd help her wash him, try and make him eat, talk to him when she'd tire out and fall asleep on the rug. Every day of this routine brought with it new changes in Dad's body. It started with his limbs, as you can probably guess. When his hands and feet fell off, there was no blood. They flaked apart, crusty and dry and brittle throughout. Even the bones of his toes and fingers had the density and consistency of dead skin. The wrists and ankles they left behind were smooth and hard. It was difficult to tell whether we were looking at flesh or exposed bone. The dark, shining surface seemed to blend into his normal arm at the base of the stumps. This discoloration would rise further up his limbs daily, and before long I awoke to see Dad's head and torso fused to the wooden chair legs, supporting my weight while I write this. Well, I use the term Dad's head and torso in the loosest possible sense. By the time his limbs were completely replaced, the rest of him had undergone a slow, harrowing transformation of its own. His shoulders and the arms attached to them descended lower and lower. They found their final resting place at Dad's pelvis, sat squarely behind his rigid legs. The chest area they'd left behind had its own problems. Day by day, Dad's neck retracted further inwards. It didn't stop when his jaw met his collarbone either. It pulled Dad's head deep into his ribcage. His face flattened as the skull supporting it sank, forcing his eyes to point in opposite directions. Eventually, they slid down to where his nipples once lay, resting glassy and vacant on his pecs. The change wasn't quick enough to break his jaw, though. Instead, it bent outward, its hinges spreading wide across Dad's broad chest. Each morning, I'd find Mom sobbing over a fresh, unnecessary piece of himself he'd discarded. Hair, ears, nose, his thingy. All of them flaked off and crumbled to dust in her hands. He lost the ability to speak as his head withdrew. Unsurprising though, right? He made his intentions clear before he went. The last words he ever said to me: "Don't cry. I am Chair. Always was Chair. Happy as Chair." That was the worst part, I think. Knowing that whatever the fuck was happening to Dad, he wasn't resisting it. That's when he'd got that initial urge to sit in the corner and not get up. He didn't fight it. That he was happy this way. The implication being that when he was human, when he was a father and husband and accountant, he wasn't. Sadly, I still don't know why or how Dad became a chair. I didn't post any photos, you see. Mom wouldn't let me, didn't want the embarrassment, wanted to keep Dad's dignity intact. The thing is, I agreed with her and kind of still do. I'm glad I didn't go to the socials with pics of Dad at various stages of his journey. The temptation was there to see if anyone could help. Nobody could have thought, could they? Dad would have become just another internet circus freak. I've done enough research and digging over the months to know that whatever happened to Dad, he's the only one. Well, almost only. Mom's own changes started around the time Dad's skin was rethreading into orange fabric, and his eyes had hardened into plastic buttons. Her change was a little different. It started in her torso, stretching her day by day while she remained in crab pose. I must say, she makes a great couch. Her transformation may have been a little more distressing, but the result is better. Sorry, Dad, it is what it is. I think the worst part with Mum was the despondency. Dad was so serene as he changed. Mum, though? Mum wouldn't stop weeping. Quiet sobs, tears that fell for a few days even after her own eyes had become flat plastic. She wasn't crying because of the change, though, I think. I think it was because she wouldn't get to see how beautiful I'll look when I go through my own metamorphosis. Thing is, I get it now. Dad was right. He was the chair. Mum was couch. I am a coffee table. I always was. I was scared at first when I realized. The truth hit me as a piano dropped from the Empire State Building. I was scrubbing the last of Mom's remaining human skin when it struck through every bone in my wrong body, just as it must have done both Dad and Mom. I spent that whole night sitting on Dad, tears falling down my cheeks, staring at my spot. I didn't want it to be true. I screamed for it not to be, more than once. I couldn't deny the facts I knew deep down to my bones, though. That spot, the space on the rug in front of chair dad and couch mom, is for me. It's mine, where I belong. Unlike blissfully accepting dad and weeping, resigned mom, I fought it for a few days. I'm not like them. I'm only 17. I have had dreams, ambitions, goals. I wanted to go to college, settle down, marry some lucky guy, and be a mom. I wasn't ready to give up my human form. I spent my nights begging for more time. Nothing answered. The urges didn't abate. My awareness of reality, now that the illusions had been swept away, was too great. When I have slept this last week or so, my dreams have always been the same. I dreamt of true reality, of how I now know things should be. I dream of me in my place, my body elongated and wooden and flat as is right, as is correct, as is natural. I have long, blissful slumbers filled with the feeling of hot ceramic mugs on my tabletop and thick carpet beneath my forelegs. I can't fight it anymore. I'm posting this here, but also printing it out to leave as a note for the removal guys. I want them to be careful with us when the bank repossesses the house and we end up in storage. Please keep us together if you can. We're a set. Dad's sick leave ended months ago. As you can imagine, the foreclosure notices have been piling up. I stopped caring about the pile of mail under the door around the time that Mom's ribcage split and flattened into her wide pinstripe velvet upholstered back. I haven't been hungry in days or thirsty. I'm not even sure if I'm breathing now. I think about it. I'm still scared, but I've come to accept that this is the way things have to be. I don't know why, they just do. Maybe it's a curse. Maybe this house is buried on some ancient ritual site. Maybe it's just some freak anomaly of physics. Who knows? Whatever the reason, I have to suck it up and accept the way things are. This body, this walking, wobbling mass of skin and bone and jiggly bits that I love so much, isn't right. It isn't mine. I'm not meant for it anymore. Once I post this and print the copy for the removal guys, I'm going to get in my spot. Then it's just a case of closing my eyes and waiting. I can already feel my limbs pulling inward, my thighs and upper arms sliding to where they'll meet at my navel in a few days. There's a tugging on the back of my knees where they'll bend in on themselves, and all 20 of my fingers and toes grow numb with each hour that passes. Do I have any regrets? Thousands. There's so much I'll never get to do, to see, to go, to be. I can't hide from the truth though, not anymore. I'm a coffee table. If you made it to the end, you're braver than most. Hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. More disturbing stories are waiting. I'll see you next time.